You're not supposed to start when I'm adjusting
I
my
didn't
microphone.
realize you were adjusting.
Hey, welcome to
No, we're gonna
episode... No, this is it.
No,
We're here.
restart
We're in
that.
it.
We'll restart
Welcome to episode 100 of the Bros Cast podcast.
It's only been 22 episodes since the last episode.
Fucking dropped my glasses. That's how
We're
tired
all
I
over
am.
the place.
We are in the middle of a 16-hour recording day
We're in the middle of anything.
in our home office
Yeah, it's a home
located
office.
in California, Georgia.
You have a huge pit bull behind you now
A huge one.
because of that new blanket wall damper that we have. It's kind of intimidating because he's actually staring at me. But I like it.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
So we're here to discuss Lord of the Clans, which is a Warcraft book. It is part of a series of 4 books. I'm hoping to read the first one, which is called Day of the Dragon, but it's pretty much a standalone story as far as I can tell.
Oh, I thought Day of the Dragon was a different fucking series.
No, it's number 1. This one's number 2.
Weird.
Yeah. There's a lot of Warcraft series, though, so it is hard to figure out which ones are connected and which ones aren't. I poked around at a couple others, like The Rise of Arthas the Lich King, and it was really fucking long.
You mean the Rise of Charlie Hunnam?
Charlie Hunnam?
Yeah.
I've never heard that name.
He's the guy who plays Arthas in the movie.
Oh, really? I haven't seen the Warcraft movie,
And
actually.
King Arthur.
Maybe I should have before we did this.
It's weird. He plays Arthur and Arthas.
All right, stop the podcast. I'll go watch the movie, and then we'll come back and restart this.
I think it's Arthas. Maybe it's not Arthas.
So this takes place actually quite a bit before the reign of the Lich King. If you don't know much about Warcraft lore, I'll give a brief background. There's lots of different races. There's orcs, trolls, humans, gnomes, dwarves, night elves, Draenei, and then I think I'm missing one.
Pandas.
I call them paladins, but they're blood elves. And then, yeah, Pandarians.
Forgetting about the pandas.
And I forgot Taurens.
That's
which
a
are
paladin.
big
Shit.
that was pretty good, though. I
Shit.
got that. I knew what you were doing there. That's a paladin.
That's the joke is that's a paladin.
Yeah.
And then heavily armored healer, that's a paladin. Anyway,
God.
it's probably funnier that I fucked it up.
So this story starts sort of before the Horde was well-formed, as it is in World of Warcraft.
The horde form.
The Horde form?
The forming of the horde.
Yeah, that's what this is. The Lord of the Clans brings together the Horde.
A horde. Exactly what is that?
I think it's just a large collection of things. Or like living things. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like a murder of crows. Maybe it's a description of a specific type of animal in a large group.
Horde mode in Siege. I mean, horde mode in Gears is like lots of stuff attacking you.
I think the rationale behind, because in Gears, the
they call
locusts
them-
were a horde.
Yeah, they're called the horde.
I think a horde is really just a very large collective.
Well, it's typically associated with like monster-like creatures.
That
Like
too,
the
yeah.
dark-
It's not a good thing.
No,
Like they would
it's not like
probably
a-
be the Alliance if they weren't.
It's not the
evil.
horde of humans.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There have been hordes of humans, but hordes of zombies sounds more appropriate.
Right.
So this whole story starts in a prologue where you meet a sorcerer, a warlock actually, named Gul'dan.
Gul'dan.
Yeah, Gul'dan, who has basically started the warlocks. So if you play a warlock in World of Warcraft, a lot of the moves are named for Gul'dan. And his master, whose name is Ner'zhul, even though it sounds like a dragon.
Ner'zhul?
Nar'zul, maybe that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Warcraft pronunciation. I'm not fluent in Orcish.
No.
So Gul'dan
Sorry, I thought you said you prepared for this. You don't,
took 4 years of Orcish and 3 years of Troll
You don't-
just to be
you
ready
don't-
for this.
you don't know Elvish yet?
Elvish was the first one I learned, and then I did
Elvish
Orcish.
is a dialect. It's English, but you just pretend you're better than everyone else.
No, not English. English.
And do fucking weird somersaults for no reason.
So Gul'dan is the first warlock because he made a deal with demons. That's where he gets his power from. And all of the warlocks are former shamans. So shamans are magical creatures that interface with the elements.
So why are there Tauren shamans but no Tauren warlocks?
There are no Tauren shamans in the original game.
Oh, it's what? No.
Or were they the only ones?
No, Taurens are the only shamans in the original
really?
base WoW game, yeah.
So that
There
doesn't make
were
any sense.
Was it the Draenei that got brought over as shamans?
n-
And then paladins weren't available to the Horde, and that was Blood Elves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's pretty sure.
But that doesn't really jive with this, because in this, orcs were the original shamans. It's possible that Taurens were also in there somewhere, but they're not a part of this story. So the former shamans who were creatures of nature are now warlocks, which are creatures of demons. And so as you pact with demons, it destroys your body. So most of the warlocks are hideous, except for the ones who made it a specific part of their deal that they stay beautiful. So unless you've made a deal with the demon, it destroys your body and it decays your will. Like, will to do anything. It's kind of like when you've had some sort of a drug and then that drug leaves your system, you go through withdrawals. It's the same idea. Once you've had the devil energy, when you lose it, you have nothing left.
I can just imagine an Ontario government
filled with that devil energy
PSA where it's like, demon energy is on the streets now.
First we had shatter, then we had fentanyl, then we had demon energy.
There's one right now where it's like fentanyl. It's like consuming the smallest amount could be fatal, and it's like, that seems like fear mongering.
But it's not.
I'm not.
True.
I don't doubt it. But the vagueness of a statement like that, where consuming any of it could kill you, it's like, I don't know. They're not explaining what it is or how you can prevent it, other than just don't do drugs.
Well, no. The commercial is for naloxone kits. Naloxone is what you're supposed to take.
Not this one. What I'm just seeing is it's just like to learn more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so brief aside to fentanyl. Fentanyl being an extreme opioid can be counteracted by a drug called naloxone. So you can get free naloxone kits at a bunch of local places, like
That's cool,
pharmacy
man.
places and stuff like that.
I love it. This fucking Canada's like, yo, we get it. You're gonna do drugs. Here's how you can save your own life.
Yeah, the commercials even say, if you are going to do street drugs, don't do them alone, and make sure you have a naloxone kit.
Yes, that's the part I really liked about it.
Yeah.
It's like, at least, like, you know, it's like saying, we'll teach, like, pregnancy prevention and STI prevention by just saying, don't have sex, kids. It's
No.
like, that's actually like, there's like 3 things that like high school kids are focused on, and it's eating and sleeping and sex.
Yeah.
So like, to tell them to just not do it, it's like, no, you have to teach them how to do it correctly.
Properly, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
You have to say, here's your condom, kids. Put it on or you die.
Well, this is a really good example of someone not having any guidance for when to use it, because all of these...
Are you relating fentanyl back to
Yes.
the warlocks?
Yes, I am. Because these warlocks have basically a drug that's totally unknown and has no regulation, and it's fueled by demon energy, so it's not like you can
Right.
regulate it anyways. So...
Oh, no. And so this book is about like a regulatory board over demon energy, right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
Gul'dan is actually the head of the council, and
Right.
he appoints members to the council on a yearly basis. And then those yearly members of the council appoint each of their own cabinet. No, okay.
And then
I'm going to abandon this
And then
now.
a man named Wal Torb goes from teaching alchemy to selling demon energy. Becomes
Blue demon energy.
What's his
A
name?
special breed.
it's actually it's the story of the fucking guy with the double blades who has like a
Oh, the Sword of the Morning?
no he's got his eyes are covered. He's a demon. His eyes are covered. He's like the bad guy of Burning Crusade.
Oh, Illidan.
Illidan, yes. It's the story of Illidan and how he like sold demon energy until he became the demon.
Well, the interesting thing about this is that they mention the Draenei, and they mention that they have destroyed the Draenei using the orcs. So the warlocks essentially forcibly took control of the orcs from the shamans and destroyed the entire Draenei world, and now are moving on to destroying other worlds.
Which is why the Draenei came to Azeroth.
Yeah, because they were being attacked in their home planet, and so they just need to work on landing. They got here fine, but they
crashed.
Yeah, they kind of crashed, and they're like, well, our ship's buried in the ground, so we'll just call it our home city, and
Right.
it'll be fine.
It's
It'll be fine.
It's like the 100.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
like, it's fine. We crashed like half a space station into the planet.
Yeah.
But it's up, now that it's
Now that it's stable on the ground, we could just walk around in it.
I mean, we designed it so that we could walk all the way around it with gravity, but now we're gonna use it vertical instead. I don't know.
And it's gonna work fine.
It works great.
Let's pretend it's all perfect.
It works very well.
That's why they never show you any shots that go from outside to inside. It's always cut away.
Yeah, it's always like it's like they're always in rooms that are level, and I'm like, you can't have a room, you can't have a space station where
everything is level. Yeah,
the rooms go around in a circle, and yet every room manages to be level. That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's so true. It would be way better if they actually were in slanted rooms at certain points. It would make more sense.
Well, you wouldn't design, like you could design something like that to be like a Ferris wheel where each room is individual and can like move on a hinge, but you'd never design that for space because that would be a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, because you'd never be able to control it. No, that's a good point. I see what you mean.
Thanks. Elon Musk, you can contact me.
Speaking of cutting to the story. So that's the end of the prologue, and then you cut to sort of the first real characters that you meet. So Duratan is the leader of his clan, the Frostwolves. And the Frostwolf clan has made a deal with actual Frostwolves, so they have wolf companions. Each of them, as they grow up, makes a lifelong companionship with a wolf. So he's sitting with his wolf, Sharptooth.
Is that AV?
Audio video?
Ultrak Valley?
I don't think
Pretty sure the Frostwolves are there, are they not?
Actually, you know what? It could be... but the Ultrak, no, it would be the Wintergrass Mountains. Oh. Because Ultrak Valley is way too far. It's on a totally different province from the Orc home city, right, of Orgrimmar. So my imagining is, it would be Wintergrass Mountains.
Where does Thunderbluff take place in this story?
They don't go to Thunderbluff at all. They only go... Yeah, next book. Well, the next book is actually a prequel. It's like before this one in the series, so we'll see.
Is this fan fiction?
No, well... No, I don't think so. So it's written by Christie Golden, who has written a lot of video game books.
Okay.
Of lore books. And I'm pretty sure she was hired. Like, this isn't a Warcraft official book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's not like fan stories, no.
I just found out that J.K. Rowling wrote the ending, the official, like, future ending, you know what I'm talking about? At the end of all the books.
Mm-hmm. The flash forward.
The flash forward to them at like 40 with kids and all that shit.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote that and just so that nobody continued writing her story.
Oh, so that there was no fan fiction?
Yeah, exactly. And she was like, and nothing ever bad happened to Harry after Voldemort or ever again.
Really?
Yeah.
She was that explicit?
She was just like, do not fucking write that Hermione got with this guy and made a kid named Charles, all right? She did this. These are the kids they had, and these are their fucking names.
Yeah, I don't know how the world goes because I have not read enough of these books.
Yeah.
But this main character, Duratan, is thinking about the era before they were exiled to Wintergrass Mountains because they used to live on the plains of Orgrimmar like everybody else did, or the plains of Durotar, which is funny because his name is Duratan, so it feels like he probably belongs in Durotar.
It's like Baelor and Baelish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Game of Thrones
Tywin
not go into how many similar names there are, too many T's. And so he's sitting outside in the snow, and he goes back into his cave to his wife, Draka, who has a baby. Man, these are orc names, man.
I just like, it's one of those names, like some of those names you hear and you're like, this person's gonna be a bitch.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, my wife Draka.
Yeah, Draka's actually hilarious though.
She sounds scary.
Yeah, she's apparently a ferocious warrior, and that's part of why he's with her.
Legs of a cyclist.
Yeah, or a bobsledder,
All right.
Like a sprinter.
I would say, yeah, okay.
One of my teachers in high school was a former bobsled competitor, and his legs were built not like tree trunks, more like chicken legs almost, where the top part was huge. Like if he gave you the falcon knee of justice, it would be game over. But the quads, his calves were not like that big, I guess, because they weren't as necessary to generate that like takeoff power. Yeah, the falcon knee of justice.
Who does that?
Captain Falcon.
No, that's Is that what it's called?
Yeah, well, we used to call it the knee of justice.
Pretty sure it's just called the Falcon Knee.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a flying knee. That's all it is, but it brings justice.
But
So
with fire.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
like a fiery Falcon Knee.
So Duratan is remembering about how he spoke out against Gul'dan, the warlock, and that's why he was exiled. So the reason that they're hiding out in the Wintergrass Mountains is because his options were exile or death. So he left with his people. And he starts to think about what life he's made for his kid, because now they have to live in this frozen wasteland essentially forever. So he decides that he has to go and tell the other chieftains why he was exiled, because he never did. That was part of the condition of him not being executed. So he had to be silent.
Oh.
So he makes this plan, and then he does the stupidest thing. He does an oath cry where he just essentially screams, because orcs really like screaming.
Yeah, they do.
So he does his oath cry, and it brings everybody out of their huts to figure out what's going on. And he promises them that he's going to reunite the clans and bring all the orcs together.
So does he yell? Oath!
It's probably more just oh, like Arnie, but better. So then Draka says she's gonna come with him, and she does something really gross too. So when they're feeding the baby, what she does is she cuts herself. She cuts her nipples so that the baby drinks both her milk and her blood at the same time. And that's how orc warriors are born, I suppose. And so anyway, she's feeding the baby, and they're talking, and Duratan forbids Draka to come with him on this like mission to go and warn the other chieftains. So she drops the baby, runs across the room, cuts his face with her nail, and then spits on him.
Holy
and tells him
shit.
there's no way he's going without her. And then in this moment,
Drops baby.
drops the baby on the floor, like they're in a cave, right? So just drops the baby on the floor. And then he realizes at this very moment how much he loves her.
Oh. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's the greatest Warcraft storytelling I've ever heard of.
Well, that's what orcs are like, man. They're a totally different breed. I know that they're big green monsters, and that's why they're different.
The way you dropped our baby reminds me of how I love you.
It really makes me love you so much more.
Every cut on my face represents more love.
So the two of them, Draka and Duratan, take their baby for some reason. Not that they should be taking their baby on a clandestine mission.
Right.
But anyways.
Well, the other option is the cave floor, so...
But there's a whole clan of people there. They could totally take care of the baby.
They have clan floors, too, and they...
They could drop their baby there,
drop
too.
Oh, maybe we could bring the baby over and drop him in someone else's cave today.
So they go to the camp of Orgrim Doomhammer,
Okay.
who, as you can imagine, wields a hammer.
Is it, like, big?
It is a massive warhammer. Actually, you can see it on the front of the book.
Oh, let me see that shit.
That is the warhammer right there.
This is not very big for a warhammer. I was expecting, like...
But he is like 9.5 feet tall. So that warhammer is actually more like 3 or 4 feet long.
All right.
So imagine it being about this big and, wielded by essentially a bear, a man bear.
Man bear orc.
Yeah, man bear orc.
Have you ever seen the hammer from Wind Waker?
No.
Where the head is as big as Link?
No.
And it's like a tiny stick arm?
Even the hammer from God of War 2 is way bigger. It's the full size of Kratos, pretty much.
Yeah, it's double-sided
Yeah.
too. I like that.
So they go to Doomhammer's camp because Doomhammer is sort of the most courageous of the chieftains. So they go to his camp, but it's dangerous for Doomhammer to have an exiled chieftain there, because if Gul'dan discovers them, he'll destroy them all. And he says at one point, he says, if death does find us today, it'll at least find us acting with honor. And I thought that that's very appropriate. The orcs are honorable to the death, like, except for the warlocks, obviously.
Better to die quick standing on your feet than to live forever
Sitting on your ass.
Crawling on your knees? It's a Lamb of God song. I forgot how it goes.
But that is the basic idea. It's sort of like live for something or die for nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, or stand for something or you'll fall for nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they are told by Doomhammer that even though something needs to be done, they have to leave the camp because they can't house them there. They can't aid them. So he has one of his men sort of march them out to this safe place where they can find food and rest and then head back either to another camp or home. But when he does that, the guy who he sent them with, the guard that he sent them with to safety, is actually one of Gul'dan's traitors. And so when they get there, 3 assassins jump them. But the 3 assassins actually kill the guard first, because that's how it goes when you do clandestine shit. Usually it's easier to kill someone than to try and pay for their silence.
Right.
Or to silence them another way, right?
Okay.
So the assassins kill the guard, first of all. And then, so because they're a proud race, the way they fight is that they announce themselves. They do. And there's even like later on scenes where they're about to attack the humans and you hear war cries, because that's what the orcs do. They basically go, I'm going to kill you, and then they come and kill you. And there's no other way around it.
They don't sneak in.
So when they're attacked by these assassins, they're totally taken off guard because that's not their usual combat, right? So Durotan, in the violence, snaps one of their necks, one of the 3 assassins. He's cut badly, though. So what happens is he hears Snowsong, or Sharptooth, sorry, his wolf die. And then he looks back and he sees Draka has been cut to pieces.
No.
And then he goes for the baby, which I guess has been dropped on the ground again. So he goes for the baby, but the assassins cut off his arms so that he can't even like hold his baby.
Oh my god.
And then the assassins are deciding if they should kill it, but they decide that they're just going to leave it for the forest creatures, so that he has to like watch the baby get eaten by wolves.
That's Thrall.
That baby is Thrall, yes.
Oh shit.
So they leave.
This is a great movie.
It would be a great movie.
Yeah.
I really believe so.
Because you could have this whole lead up scene where you think that this movie is actually about
Durotan.
Like, you could do a whole movie actually about Durotan. You know, the way that the Rogue One, like,
and then the second one would actually be about Thrall.
And yeah, it's just a baby at the end of the movie, and it like fades to black.
It's just crying on a forest road.
Yes, it's crying, and it fades to black, but the crying continues.
The baby does cry, but not that often, because orcs are so hardy. Yeah, that not that many things get to them.
Like Archer yelling.
So cut to Adilus Blackmore, who is
a gnome?
No, he's a human.
Oh.
And he's the lord of a fort of Durnhold.
Sorry?
The lord of a fort.
The lord of a fort?
Yeah. You know, it's like the Lord of the Clans, but smaller. Lord of the Fort.
The lord of a fort.
So he's hunting out with his assistant, whose name is Tamis. Tamis Foxton.
Sorry?
Tamis Foxton. Yeah, I know. The names in this are great.
Okay. I don't know if I ever told you this, but like I like to say is it fuck sakes? God damn it, this is fuck stick. That's right.
Oh.
But then I gave it like a full name, Andrew Fuckstick. So Tamis, what is his name?
Tamis Foxton.
Foxton.
Tamis Fuckstick. Pretty good one.
Like sometimes I'll be like, you know, it's like Bob Saget instead of God damn it.
Oh yeah.
I'll just be like, Andrew Fuckstick.
Nice.
Fucking okay. I'm sorry about this chair. It's like exploding.
Yeah,
me.
there's nothing you can do about that. Just don't move.
Don't move.
So
Remain motionless. Remain motionless.
So Blackmore is a bit of a drunk, but he's this sort of hero type guy. He's an asshole as well. And he kicks his horse like way too hard, unnecessarily hard, and then his horse comes to an abrupt stop because it runs upon the kid.
Okay.
It's like hearing this kid, and they're moving towards the baby that was dropped in the forest. And then when his horse stops abruptly, he punches it in the neck. So yeah, he's just total asshole. Finds this baby among all these corpses, all these orc corpses.
Sorry, don't stop hung up on that scene.
Him punching his horse.
He's just like, the horse is like,
yeah.
Keep moving.
Horse, I probably didn't even notice. I mean, I don't know how big this guy is, but actually, I guess, yeah, it would hurt still.
Yeah, it would know.
It would be funny if it just kicked him off, smoked him in the stomach, just stomped on him a little bit. But this is the first orc baby that they've ever seen, the humans, because the only orcs they ever normally find are in combat, right? So it's all fully grown males for the most part. So Atlas Blackmore's father was actually a traitor to the Alliance, and that's sort of a cloud that he's lived under for his whole life. So he sees the orc as being something he could use to get redemption. And he wants to get both rich and powerful, but what I noticed is that his motives in using the baby orc are basically the same as Gul'dan using the orc army for his own purposes. And I find that there's a really interesting parallel between those two. And even later in the book, it actually specifically mentions the parallel between Gul'dan and Blackmore. So I thought that was really cool because they're both the exact opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
You know, one's a horrible monster for the Alliance, and one's a horrible monster for the Horde.
That's an interesting. Right now, I'm playing Battlefront 2, and the storyline is you're playing as the Empire, and you're playing as like special forces. And there's a scene. It takes place after the original trilogy, and you're on the Forest Moon of Endor, I think it is, when the Death Star explodes, and your characters look up at it, and the one character is teary-eyed.
Whoa.
It's really good at explaining that the Empire is just made up of people who are just like the Rebellion, who believe that their side is the one liberating the galaxy.
Fuck.
It's great.
Yeah, it makes it hard. It entangles everything.
Yeah.
So he decides that this baby orc is a great showpiece because they have gladiator bouts back at Durnhold. And the idea is that if you grew up an orc and taught it how to fight like a person, it would be the greatest gladiator ever.
Yep.
So that was his strategy. But the baby orc refused to eat because they were trying to feed it meat, but it was too young to eat at that point. And so in his frustration, Blackmore drops the baby again
God damn it,
onto
man.
the stone ground and just walks away from
Andrew Fuckstick.
Andrew! So he gave the baby the name Thrall because Thrall means slave.
Means to drop.
This is baby orc drop. That's what we will call him. But I'm not sure what language it is, but Thrall, I'm pretty sure, means slave in at least their dialect, their English dialect. So they named him slave.
Right.
And they even call him Thrall of Durnhold, slave of Durnhold. So it's pretty obvious his place in that world.
Yeah.
So Tamis is talking to his wife, whose name is Clania,
Okay.
while their daughter is eavesdropping on them. Her name is Taretha.
Oh, nice.
Tari.
That's a nice name.
And Clania does not like the camps that they have because they've built these internment camps for orcs.
Oh, no.
Because this is many, many years after Gul'dan has disappeared. So the orcs used to be this horrible fighting force, but now they're just sort of, like I said, when the demon energy resides from you, you just become this shell. And they have all these shelled orcs prisoned in these camps, which are just kind of literal internment camps. They're just walled in enclosures where they feed them very little and just watch them all the time.
Wow.
So she talks about how she doesn't like that that these camps are around, and she talks about how it's sort of an abomination that there's an orc baby in the castle. And then is very quickly turned around because she's basically asked to feed the orc because she also has a baby, and that means that she could breastfeed. So very shortly after this, her son dies.
Oh, no.
And then she takes to feeding the orc baby because in exchange, Blackmore will make them rich. Yeah.
So the baby, like, bites open her nipple to get blood, too?
The mom had to do that for the orc, so that just doesn't happen. They just didn't do that for him. But my guess is that that's more of a voodoo thing. I don't know if that really actually helps the baby get any bigger.
Probably not.
Probably not. Because there's protein in blood, but it's weird.
I don't know. I have a feeling that ingesting blood in large amounts is probably not good for you.
Yeah, there's things in it that you don't need in large doses.
Iron.
But so that means that what?
That's why they make their stuff out of iron.
Because they get it out of the blood?
Strong.
That's actually why you're supposed to cook at a cast iron if you're a vegetarian, because you get iron that way that you can't get from your food.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
So in a very real way, that does actually apply. But this is where Taretha essentially gets a new brother because her brother dies, her young brother. But Thrall, this baby orc, is sort of brought in his place in a way, right? Because now the mother is taking care of him as if he's her own child.
Yeah.
So she has this sort of brother by bond, not by blood. And as soon as he's, I think, 6 years old, or as soon as he's able to eat, he's taken away from Clania, and he's basically just sequestered all the time.
Fucking name.
Clania?
Clania.
Yeah. So at the age of 6, he's the size of a full-grown human.
Wow.
So he's huge. Like, really, truly huge.
He's like Jack.
A little bit. Like Jack from Jack and Daxter?
No, from the movie Jack, by Robin Williams.
Oh my god, yeah, by the time his clocks run too fast. So at the age of 6, he can already read and he can write letters, but he can't write numbers. And then Blackmore comes in and wants to show him what his place is. And this just gives you an idea of what Blackmore is really like. He says to him, "It means slave." He's talking about his name. "It means that you belong to me. It means that I own you. Do you understand that?" And then he pokes him with a finger at the same time. Like, really fucking poking the beast here. And this is a 6-foot tall orc, right?
Yeah.
Even though he's 6 years old, he is the size of Blackmore. And he's still, like, he's already trying to instill this idea that you are a slave, you will always be a slave, and it doesn't matter what you do because you will still be a slave. Because Thrall will be too powerful one day to keep. So he needs to be trained to sort of
Right.
subconsciously be with Blackmore.
Well, he probably understands that power resides where people believe it resides. So he's teaching this guy that he doesn't have power, even though he has immense power.
And that's exactly what it is. He's trying to make him feel inferior, even though he is superior.
Yeah.
And so when Thrall doesn't answer him because he says, "Do you understand that?" He slaps him across the face, and Thrall was insulted, but it didn't hurt at all. Because he's an orc, so he has much thicker skin. Literally. And then he tries to smile, and Blackmore says, "Don't do that. It makes you look uglier than you already are. Humans smile, and orcs don't."
Holy.
Yeah, so he basically just telling him, "You're a piece of shit who's here to fight and nothing else."
Wow.
And he even tells Jerim, like, "All right, is he able to read?" And Jerim said, "Yeah." And he said, "All right, then we don't need you anymore. If he can read, that's fine. Like, that's all he needs to do." And then
Wow.
immediately marched him outside to learn to fight.
Whoa.
So at 6, he's already, like, learning to fight to be a gladiator.
What?
Yeah, so this...
So how do orcs mature? Like, at 6, is he similar to a human 6-year-old?
In mental maturity, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Which is the crazy part, because he grows up so fast.
Yeah.
So they take him outside of his cell, but at this point, he's never actually been outdoors. So he's never been in the sunlight. So he's confused at first because he doesn't know what shadows are. So he can't figure out if they're real things or not.
Whoa.
He's never been there. He has no reason to know. So all the guards are laughing at him for obvious reasons,
Yeah.
because it's hilarious to them.
Did he ask the guards where the auction house was?
Would you like to please direct me to this profession and the auction house and also to a reagents merchant?
The reagents.
So
They're called regents.
there's this troll dummy when he gets out there that's just meant to be whacked. And so they give Thrall a sword and they say, "All right, try it." And when he puts the sword in his hand, it feels like it should be there. It's one of those things where orcs have it in their blood, literally. And so he charges the troll, and with this sort of, he does like he stomps his feet and he screams, and then he charges the troll and he breaks it right off on his first strike.
With a sword.
With a wooden practice sword.
Whoa.
And he's expecting that he's going to get in trouble because that's the only thing that ever happens to him.
Yeah.
But Blackmore is obviously super happy.
Yeah.
And so they strap the troll back up and they go back to their training. So he's already stronger than most humans, and he's 6 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So then he sees Charitha while he's out there, and she's, I think, walking with her mom or something. And Charitha has vibrant blonde hair, so she's really obvious, right? She's like stands out in a crowd. And also, everyone hates Thrall except for Charitha because he's kind of her brother.
Oh.
So she waves at him, and he's never really seen anyone wave, but he just kind of smiles at her, even though he was told not to.
This is still
Disobedient
a fantastic movie.
It would make, oh man, all these books would make great movies, but the problem is no one wants to make a great movie. People want to make a profitable movie.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, yeah. That's why
So-
really good content comes out of countries where not a lot of content comes out of, where a government's willing to put money towards local talent. Like Auntie Donna.
Yeah, because it's local in Australia, right?
Yeah. So they make good content because they're making their money by making it,
That's true. And that's a good support system.
so that it makes money afterwards.
That's a good way to do it, man.
Yeah.
So he trains under Blackmore for several years.
Sorry, I should say, I actually don't know if any of that was true. It definitely says Screen Australia on their 1999 thing. I don't actually know how it works.
Either way, it's a
Sometimes,
good concept.
Like Russian Badger said, that he's like, this video is sponsored by this, but sometimes sponsored means they flew you out for free, paid for your meal, and show you stuff.
There's no actual money involved.
Sponsorship doesn't necessarily mean they like threw some money at you.
But either
Anyway.
way, it's the collaboration, right?
Right.
That's the big goal.
Yeah.
So he trains under Blackmore for several years, and Blackmore is getting worse and worse, his drunkenness. And the way he interacts with Thrall is two opposite people. There's the sober version and the drunk version who behave totally differently. So obviously that puts a rift between them. That if that had not been there, Thrall may have been a more loyal, obedient slave.
Yeah.
But because it's hard to judge what your master wants because he keeps changing his mind, it makes everything more challenging.
Yes.
So then he meets a trainer who's brought in to teach him more, a teacher named Sergeant. It's the only name he gets. So he's 6 feet tall, which is big for a person, and he's got these golden earrings in his ears. And so he challenges everybody that if you can rip the earring out of my ear, then I deserve it. But if you can't, then I'm going to knock you on your ass. So that's sort of the deal. It's like when you can finally grab my earring, you're ready.
Holy.
Yeah. And Sergeant's a cool character. He's probably one of the most moral characters. He kind of reminds me of Ned Stark a little bit. Trying to do what's right, but living in a world of horrible, monstrous people. So it's not the easiest thing to do what's right.
Or Animaeus.
Or Animaeus from Spartacus. Yes, definitely. A man trapped, essentially, between bad people and good decisions.
Animaeus. I need you presently.
So Thrall actually almost crushes Sergeant in their first battle because he has never been told to control his emotions, to control the bloodlust. So Sergeant's the first one that teaches him when to use bloodlust, and also that it's good at other times to not have it. And he teaches him about mercy. And I thought that this was a good line. So Thrall says mercy, and then he turned it under his breath. Sorry, Thrall turned the word over his tongue. It was a sweet word. So Thrall likes the idea of mercy, though no one has ever shown him mercy in his life, other than this one person now. So
Maybe.
Thrall clearly has the blood of his father in him.
Yeah.
He clearly has the right motivations, even though he's at this point still only like 13 or 14 years old. Actually, not even. I don't even think he's 12 yet. And this is the point at which Thrall actually gets to learn more, because I told you that they sent away his teacher, Jarim. And Sergeant realizes that you can't have someone who is good at battle if they aren't good with strategy, which is true. And so he goes to Blackmore and he tries to argue to get books brought back to Thrall. And Blackmore even says, I imagine I'll regret this. But then he gives him the books anyways, which is hilarious because it's such obvious foreshadowing.
Yeah.
You never want to educate a slave.
Right.
Generally, that's the rule. Like, if you want someone to remain your slave, you don't want them to be educated, because when they're educated, they'll realize that slavery is abhorrent and that...
Yeah. Well, it's the same way you, like, if you want to control any populace, it's much easier when they don't know what they can't have.
Well, that's why 1984 is so dark.
Yeah.
Because it's all about information. So he actually gives Taretha the job of bringing the books to Thrall.
Oh.
Because Taretha is essentially one of his servants.
Yeah.
And so he gives her a bag full of books, and she brings him the books, but she slips a note inside of it.
Mm.
So Thrall is super excited to read the books, but then when the note falls out and he reads it, it's basically just from Taretha saying, like, do you want to exchange letters? Kind of. Like, she doesn't, it's not like she's saying, I'm going to get you out of here. It's really just making contact. And she says, you know, something along the lines of, would you like to do that? And Thrall doesn't have anything to write with, so he writes with a fingernail in his own blood. He writes yes on the back of it.
He uses blood?
Yeah, just like his mama. Oh my god. So he wins his first battle when he's 8 years old. And so at this point, he's only been training for about 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And one sec. So at this point, for some reason, the thought had never occurred to him that he could leave or that he should leave. He even says, the thought of escaping had never occurred to him. He was a slave, Thrall. Blackmore was his master, Sargent was his trainer, and Taretha was his secret friend. All was as it should be.
Mm.
So because he has no reference point, he feels like this life is the best life he could hope for.
Wow.
That's the only reason he hasn't hatched a plan to escape yet, because he is sort of happy.
Well, it's kind of like Doctore talks about, like, you bring, like, he brings dishonor to this ludus. Like, he's a slave, and yet he wholeheartedly believes in the system of slaves fighting to the death, believing that they will die with glory and honor. He's been so brainwashed into that idea that he himself is a slave to the system, but doesn't...
He is a cog in the system.
But feels like he's like, I don't need freedom because I'm where I want to be. It's like, right.
That's dark, and that is exactly what it is. So then, many years later, when he's 12 years old, he sees his first orc, his first other orc in his life. And at this point, he's basically fully trained at 12. And he's doing this thing that they always do, that I forget what they call it, ringing. And the idea is that Thrall pretends to be a regular orc, like a creature, and sort of fights like a deranged maniac, and then all these new trainees try and take him down. It's training for the other men, not for him.
Right.
And so while this is happening, orcs are being brought into the castle in cages. And one of the orcs manages to break his bonds and break out of the cage that he's in, and charges straight for Thrall in the middle of all these other dudes attacking him, shouting something in Orcish.
Right.
And so as he's getting closer, all of the soldiers just sort of jump on him and just kill him. So,
oh, shit.
Yeah, so that orc just dies, and Thrall never really figures out why.
Yeah.
Like, why it would charge him, of all things. And that's obviously not good for Blackmore, because first of all, you don't want him to see any orcs until he's ready, and second of all, you don't really want to see the orcs to be slaughtered in front of him.
Yeah.
Because that's also another way to break the bond between them.
Yeah.
You know, shove a wedge in there. So...
Is that what they call it when you stab somebody with a sword? Shove a wedge in there? That's kind of what a sword is.
Shove a big old wedge?
Like, any blade is actually kind of just a very, very sharp wedge.
That's true. I can see that. Well, at this point, Blackmore is pissed off at Sargent because it's one of those things where your manager will do something that's their fault and then get angry at you. He's pissed at Sargent for having let him see the orcs, even though he was the one who brought the orcs into the courtyard.
We call that bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. And he almost lets slip to Sargent what his plans are for Thrall, because his ultimate plans for Thrall are to lead an orc army against the Alliance. So he wants to take over his own faction using an army of orcs.
Wow.
And that's why he wants Thrall, because Thrall is to be their lord.
Oh boy.
So he's actually grooming Thrall for the position that Thrall was born to, which is to lead the orcs.
Wow.
And he doesn't even know it. He thinks Thrall is just some random orc. So Thrall is actually the largest orc anyone has ever seen.
Right.
He's massive. They never actually give you a height on him, but I would imagine that he is similar in size to Frankenstein's monster. He is gigantic.
Like add a foot for every time he got dropped.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So if he was supposed to be like 7 feet, he's more like 9 or 10.
Wow.
He's huge. And that obviously adds to his fame because it's easier to recognize an orc that has one major distinguishing feature and that he's just huge. So for some reason, he still has the blue and white cloth that he was wrapped in as a baby.
Like around his loins.
Well, back then he was fully wrapped in it, and now he just has it in his cell.
Oh.
But that's something that should be taken from him. Why would you leave him the one thing that could remind him who he is?
Yeah.
When, like, it should have been discarded when he was a baby. It should never have made it to his adulthood.
For
I don't
12 years.
Yeah, because effort must have been taken to preserve that cloth while he was a baby. Who did that? What was the purpose of that? But I guess it's a plot device, so that's why it's in there. And at this point, he's actually sending messages to Tari all the time. So he's sending them to Tari like on a weekly basis. They're sending messages back and forth through the books that she's bringing him. And so she actually tells him how he was fed when he was a baby and how her mom breastfed him. And at first, he'd been touched by that. But then as he grew older and learned more, he understood that she had not been moved to suckle him out of love, but out of desire to increase her standing with Blackmore. All roads of thought ended with Blackmore. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that he really ruins everyone's lives, Blackmore.
Yeah.
He doesn't do it all intentionally. It's not like, I want to fuck all these people up. But it's one of those things where in trying to get what he wants and being reckless about it, he brings everyone down around him constantly.
He's the lord of a fort, right?
Of Durnhold, yes.
Durnhold?
Durnhold.
Durnhold?
Yeah.
Like
Durnhold.
Tyler Durnhold?
Tyler Durnhold. Yes. Something like that. There's another lord named Lord Langston, and he's sort of Blackmore's right-hand man, but he doesn't seem to own anything. He doesn't seem to have any claim to land or house or anything like that. He's essentially just a minion, but that happens to have a lordship. There's one point, this is one of my favorite quotes by by Blackmore. So Tamis is at him is at a game with him. They're at gladiator matches.
Yeah.
And this is a gladiator match that Thrall will be fighting in. And then Blackmore looks up at Tamis and says, how many is that today? And Tamis looks around at all the empty bottles of alcohol that are all like strewn about. And then Blackmore looks at him and says, counting the bottles, you pathetic excuse for a man. You farm out your own wife to suckle monsters, and you dare imply that I have weaknesses?
Holy.
So he's just a total piece of shit.
He just goes on the offense the second that you have anything to say.
He is horrendous, and that's why no one has love for him at all. So then on to the battles, and at this point, the answer to the question he was asking was 7 battles have already passed. So Thrall has already done 7 battles in the gladiator ring in this one day. So then his 8th foe is cats, jungle cats that haven't been fed. So
cats.
First they dance, then they fight, then they die. So he kills the cats, is wounded, but kills the cats. And then his 9th opponent is an ogre, one of those 2-headed ogres, which are much, much larger than orcs.
Yeah.
So I would say if an orc is 9 feet tall, an ogre is probably more like 14.
What's that guy's name? The one. You hated his name. Herp Derp.
Herp Derp. I forgot about him. I don't even remember what he was in.
He was in What was after Northrend?
After Northrend was Cataclysm.
Okay, so he was Cataclysm then.
Okay, yeah.
And we're fighting him, and he comes into the ring, and you're like, I don't like that guy's name. Herp Derp.
I'm pretty sure that's a long-standing WoW joke too, the herp derp thing.
Oh, okay.
Because of that name.
Because it's like each head, like one is herp and one is derp.
Well, it's kind of like Hogger. You remember Hogger?
I do.
And not many people who weren't around in the original era do know what Hogger is, because you only hear about it in sort of like weird
trade chat.
Yeah, weird sort of. It's kind of like when someone says, "I used to walk uphill through glass to get to school."
Through glass.
Yeah, you never heard that one? Uphill both ways through glass.
Imagine Darth Maul's like, he's like, I used to walk uphill both. I don't know why I said Darth Maul. Both ways through weird laser walls that turned on automatically.
That sounds about right. So he's battling this ogre, and the ogre has this massive two-handed spear, and they give Thrall what they called a flail? Fuck, I forget what.
Flanged mace?
No, I forget what they called it. They called it something definitely wrong. Like, I think they called it a mace, but it was actually a flail.
Oh.
It was a flail, though, with a ball on a chain attached to a stick. The ball is on a chain and attached to this stick, so cleanup is easy as picking up a stick.
But what if I miss with my ball on a stick? Well, it's easy. You can just go for a second attempt.
So Thrall does land some blows against the ogre because he's much faster, but he's too exhausted, and eventually the ogre actually stabs him through and through.
Oh.
So it stabs him through the chest and then essentially like into the ground. So he's now pinned to the ground.
Oh.
And then the fight's over, so they come out and they sort of like trap the ogre in this net, a trap net.
Oh, wow.
And
a trap net.
No, that's literally what they're called, trap nets. And they just drag, so they trap the ogre and they just flop him down on a cart and drag him out of the ring.
Oh, okay.
And then, so Blackmore normally brings healers to Thrall as soon as he's done in the ring, but he's pissed that Thrall wasn't able to do 9 in a row. So instead, he comes in and beats Thrall.
Oh.
And then sends his men in to go and beat Thrall.
Oh, no.
And then has him healed. Because, you know, you don't want to heal him, then beat him, then heal him
Like
again. You might as well do it all at once, right?
Do they keep like a disc priest on hand? Like he's like throwing heals on him?
Actually, they do. They essentially have like real healers, like priests that. So there's even a scene later on where Thrall is trying to prove to someone else the cruelty that he suffered by the humans. But when he turns around and shows off his back, there's no scars because he was healed too well. There's no evidence of the injuries that he had.
When they laugh at him?
Yeah.
Because they're like,
Nice, what do you, yeah, nice back, dude. Yeah, exactly. So after all that, Sergeant comes in and apologizes because he tried to stop. Well, he stopped the men from beating him, but it was too little, too late. And at that point, Thrall decides that it's finally time to escape. And the goal is that the next time there's a dark moon, the next time it's going to be too dark for humans to see, he'll escape. And so he hatches a plan. And at this point, he now needs to pretend absolutely nothing's wrong. Because if he shows any sign of discontent or resentment, the things might change. They might move him to a different cell. They might put more guards on him.
Yeah.
Right? So he's actively trying to suppress anything like that. And just sort of play cool, pretend that everything is normal. And he's grateful to the humans that he met who are nice, like Taretha and Sargent, but he actually finds that makes it worse because it proves how shitty Blackmore is.
Right.
Because if he only had bad humans around, he'd have no example of what could be. Right?
I know far too many people that I've worked for who intentionally keep shitty people around them just to make themselves look good by comparison.
Ew, what a gross behavior.
Very fucking real thing.
Ew.
It's like, this person is clearly pulling from their time working at McDick's or something.
Man, weird.
Yeah.
So Thrall gets Tari in on the plan to help him escape because he needs help. And so he wakes to the sound of bells and smoke because there's a fire going on somewhere.
Bells?
Yeah.
Oh, like
Ding
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 ding ding ding. I'm imagining
Yeah.
like the like a fire
A
alarm.
school bell.
And I'm like,
Yeah, no,
dude,
not
what
quite
are
like
they
that.
harnessing electricity?
No, like church bells essentially. And so he wraps everything up in a blanket and then pretends to sleep so that the guards will assume that it's better to go help with the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the guards go help with the fire, it takes him 5 attempts, 5 hits to just blow the door right off his cell. Yeah. So he just blows his way out of his cell. Finally gets it's kind of funny. At one point he like hides in a corner so that the guards can't see him, and I'm just imagining this huge creature like Sully from Monsters Inc. trying to hide in a little like narrow corridor.
It's like doesn't Mr. Incredible do that?
Yeah, he does.
He has like a vase that's not as big as him.
Yeah, and he just so he gets outside and Tari has left this massive cloak for him, but obviously it's a human cloak, so it's not really big enough to cover him. But because everything's on fire and there's animals running everywhere and like people trying to bring water in, nobody notices as he slips out.
Yeah.
So he slips out and he's gone into the night. And he goes to this place where Tari told him about. It's there's a dragon rock, like a rock that looks like a dragon, and below it is a cave. And so they meet in that cave, and Tari brings him a bunch of stuff. She brings him some bandages, some food. She brings him a knife. So she risks a lot, actually, to pull this all off. And she also gives him a map showing him where all the orc encampments are, on the idea that he's not going to go to them.
Oh.
Right? That's the plan, is like, please avoid these.
Oh, no.
And then when she leaves, he goes, great, now I'll go for the camps.
Hey, so what's your super secret plan so I can avoid being part
so
of
that
it?
I don't go that way? And she gives him a hug, and he doesn't know what to do because he's never been hugged before.
Oh, no.
But it's crazy how much bigger he is, because his hand is 3 times the size of her hand.
Whoa.
Obviously, she's a woman, he's a man, but that's still 3 times the size. This is ridiculous. Even though that happens in humans. The largest human hands and the smallest human hands, there would be that size difference.
Probably,
but he decides that he's going to head for the farthest camp, which makes sense. You want to go to the camp that's the farthest away from Durnhold, because that's where the camps are led out of, because they are Blackmoor's camps.
Right.
So if you're going to attack one, you might as well attack one or go to one that's as far away as possible. So he also finds out at this time that Taretha is actually Blackmoor's mistress now. So as she grew up, she went from being a servant to being essentially one of his whores.
Oh.
Yeah, and Thrall is confused. What?
She getting paid?
Well, she gets to live.
Well,
It's payment enough.
Because a whore has to get paid.
That's true. So she's really just like a kept woman.
A kept.
Yeah.
Kept.
So Thrall is confused at why she is ashamed of that, because obviously it's not her fault. It's Blackmoor's fault.
Right.
But this is just part of Thrall not fully understanding any sort of communication, let alone human communication. And Thrall runs all night and then rests by the day because he's afraid that there will be flying machines, which there are actually flying machines in the world, which is kind of funny because they have like dragons.
Yeah.
So you wonder why flying machines would be necessary, but and when he's sleeping during the day, he is discovered by a group of humans. And so he wakes up being dragged in a net.
Oh, no.
And so they take all of his stuff, including the letters to Taretha, but they can't read. So they don't know what the letters mean at this point. So they don't know who he is yet.
Oh.
And at this point, Blackmoor and company discover that the fire was deliberate because they realized none of the animals were burned, even though the fire started in the barn.
Oh.
Somebody had to have let them out and then started the fire.
Yeah.
So they at least know that they're looking for somebody. And they also notice that one of Blackmoor's knives is missing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so the evidence does start to mount. So when Thrall is taken to the nearest camp, which is actually not the one he wanted to go to. It's not the super far away one because he didn't make it that far. So they just grab him and bring him to the closest camp. And when he gets inside, that's when he first sees how drained the orcs are. Because they're all, imagine a group of people basically in the fetal position, but sitting on their feet. all crowded around troughs and little like holes of water and like just sitting in a big muddy field surrounded by a barbed wire fence.
Whoa.
That's what the orcs are. And if you know what orcs are from other parts of this story or from World of Warcraft, orcs are not like that at all.
No.
Orcs are never docile. So he originally thinks they're drugged. That's his like thought. And one of the officers thinks he recognizes Thrall, but doesn't know from where, which is stupid because the only places you would see an orc are either out in the wild or in the gladiator ring. So kind of, if you recognize him, you should probably know where he's from.
Probably.
But anyway, it's one of those things where you don't want to say you know him if you don't, because your superiors will probably kill you for being wrong. Right? That's what happened back in the era of kings and queens. Like they would kill the messenger if the message was false. So you want to be damn sure you know who this orc is. So he approaches a small group of orcs because he's now just essentially in this camp. And he sees that they have these red eyes. His eyes are blue. Most other orcs are, he doesn't know this, but most orcs are brown or blue eyes. Some have green. But they all have these glowing red eyes.
Oh.
Yeah. And those are the ones with the red eyes. Those are the ones that are sluggish and slow and all seem to be drugged.
And they're like demon shells?
Essentially, yeah. So there's a moment where Blackmore and Taretha are riding out in nature, and they're not hunting because she doesn't want to kill anything, but that's essentially what they're doing. You know how sometimes we used to go for night drives?
Right.
Like sometimes you just want to go. And Blackmore is actually starting to believe that he loves Taretha. Even though she's a prisoner, I guess it's still easy to convince yourself that it's real.
Yeah.
And this is the moment when Tamis comes to him and says they're pretty sure they found Thrall. And that, let's go get him. So they go to this camp, and there the leader of the camp is bathing when Blackmore interrupts her. And she has a red-eyed orc that's actually working as her servant. So in these camps, because the orcs are so docile, they even use some of them to do work around the camps. So they're actually slaves.
Huh.
And so Blackmore interrupts her looking for Thrall. And then the girl, the slave that the officer had, actually goes into the camp to try and warn Thrall that Blackmore is there.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is unusual because the docile orcs normally just sit there, right? They don't do anything.
Interesting.
So Thrall is out in the yard when all this is going on, and he's talking to this red-eyed orc called Kelgar. And Kelgar tells him about the history. He tells him all the things that Thrall doesn't already know about orcs, about how the clans used to be and what the Horde was and what their wars used to be like, what shamans were, and that their powers were the only magic that existed before warlocks. So, which is unusual because in World of Warcraft there's a shitload of magic. So it doesn't always work perfect. But I'm just sticking with this story here. And he tells him about the Dark Pact. He tells him about what that did to the race of orcs. And then he tells him that there's one orc left who supposedly has not succumbed, and that is Grom Hellscream.
I recognize
You recognize
Hellscream.
that name, yeah. So Grom Hellscream supposedly is somewhere to the west. And that's all that he is able to tell Thrall, because obviously he's been stuck in a camp, so he doesn't know where Hellscream is now. And then this is the point that the female orc shows up to warn him that someone is coming looking for him. And so they call a lineup. The guards call like all the orcs to line up at a time that's unusual. So clearly they're coming to scoop Thrall up.
Yeah.
And so Thrall already knew that it would be easy to escape from these camps, because these camps aren't designed to hold live orcs. They're designed to hold these like shelled orcs.
Yeah.
So Kelgar, in an effort to create a diversion, actually attacks the female orc.
Oh.
So two orcs that have no energy to do anything attack each other so that they can create a diversion for Thrall.
And it's just like wet noodles, just like...
Probably. But also the guards. Imagine how confused the guards would be. They've never seen any of them fight between each other ever before.
It's like they're watching two kids in like extremely slow moving. You know those
Slap fight.
No. You know those little tiny cars that kids can drive. They're like tiny like battery powered ones.
Battery powered.
It's like two like fluffy cars, and they're like boof, and then they're like backing up and boof.
Pretty much. And then Thrall just runs to the wall and just jumps over it. It really is not hard to get out of. It's sort of like when you see a horse that's tied up to a really light object,
Right.
but because it assumes it can't get away, it won't.
Right.
Or a cow that's in a field that has like this super thin wire with a really mild electrical current, and it could just charge through that wire.
Yep.
But it doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Same idea. So Thrall leaves, and then he tries to set this really complex trail, like looping over his path to make it look like he's going one way, and then cuts back the other way and heads west to try and find Grom. So now he at least has a plan.
He's smart.
He knows where he's going. And this is where Blackmore figures out who set the fire, because he's given his knife, right? Because they took it from him, and he's also given the letters from Taretha. So he knows.
Didn't start the fire.
But he gave the letters over to Blackmore. And I always thought that was a little irresponsible to keep the letters with you.
Yeah.
I get why he took them with him, but probably should have destroyed those. But anyways, it's not like he's seen as much TV as we have. He didn't have as much to go off of. So Blackmore demotes Remka, who is the Remka. That was the name of the one who was bathing, the commander. Demotes her for losing Thrall and promotes the one who recognized Thrall in her place.
Oh boy.
And that's exactly why that guy was so hesitant on recognizing Thrall. You don't want to say anything or do anything wrong because Blackmore will just erase you. Although he only demotes the girl, he doesn't actually kill her. And then he gets back to the castle, Blackmore, and he walks into his bedroom where Taretha is sleeping, and he says, "Sleep well, pretty traitor. Sleep well until I have need of you."
Jeez.
So he intentionally chooses not to tell her that he knows so that he can keep her close for when it's relevant.
Wow.
Yeah, it's dark. So Thrall survives off just anything he can find. Water from springs, he eats bugs, he eats fruit, just anything he can find. Mm-hmm. And then one day he smells meat, like well-cooked meat.
Who's out here cooking all this damn meat?
Who's cooking the meat? So he shows up to this settlement, and he sees all of these human farmers gathered together for a feast. So he waits, and he waits for nightfall, and then once nightfall comes, he waits for like what would essentially be 2 or 3 in the morning, till everything is dark, everyone is in bed, and all is quiet. And this is when you find out that there's actually 2 moons. There's the white moon and a bluish-green moon.
Weird.
So one they call the White Lady, and the other they call the Blue Child. Those are what the orcs name the moons. So that's part of why you get less dark nights, because you have 2 moons to provide light.
Oh.
So a lot of their nights are actually fairly well illuminated.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And you also have to plan your battles accordingly, because on a dark night versus a bright night makes a huge difference in how much people can see.
Wow.
Yeah. So he waits for everyone to be down and quiet. And then he sneaks from house to house, stealing a little bit of food from each place, because he doesn't want to leave any of them without food. So, which is weird, because again, Thrall has only ever known cruelty, but has only ever shown compassion.
That's really interesting.
And unusual. That it's one of those things that doesn't really happen in real life as much as it happens in stories.
In real life, people kind of go one of 2 ways. If they've been abused as a child, they're either abusive or they're completely against all abuse and will stand for other people. If you're bullied as a child, you're probably you're going to either be a bully or you're going to be the one who stands up against bullies.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to put it. And I guess Thrall has really decided he's picked his side of the fence.
Typically, it's not like I dealt with this crazy thing when I was a kid, and now I have no opinion of it.
Now I don't give a shit, yeah. So Thrall actually accidentally wakes up the humans because there's a girl who sees him through the window, and when she says something, the dog starts barking. And Thrall actually has to kill the dog.
I think the story would have been much better if the dog started biking.
Started pedaling right at him. Like jousting bikes. It's got like a lance and everything. So the humans surround Thrall with, like an angry mob with pitchforks. Kind of looks like a scene from Shrek if you think about it. Big green monster in the middle, bunch of villagers with their pitchforks. And so Thrall intentionally does not harm any of them because he knows that he can get away without hurting them and he doesn't want to hurt them. So he leaves. Humans are useless. Human farmers versus a 9-foot tall killing machine. Like, he kind of just took their pitchforks and ran. Sorry, people, I'm out of here. And that again speaks to how he is. But then he wakes up again having been captured, but this time by orcs instead of by people. So he's captured by 8 orcs, and they want to kill him because he speaks like a human. Because he speaks English. He doesn't know how to speak Orcish yet. He only knows a couple of words. But then he mentions Hellscream's name, and suddenly they don't know if that means they should definitely kill him or if they should take him to Hellscream. He does speak a couple of really broken Orcish words to try and explain that he's not there to kill Hellscream. And after a while, they said that they would take him there, but he would have to prove himself. So they blindfold him, but in order to blindfold him, he has to stoop down because he's too tall for the other orcs to blindfold. So he really is massive, even compared to orcs.
It's like when Superman, he's like, oh yes, please, put these handcuffs on me.
Yeah, isn't there a scene where he just breaks them off?
He takes them off
really
like they're
casually?
there. Yeah. He just kind of breaks the chain between them, and he's like, look, listen, I'm not trying to hurt you guys.
That's so funny. That's honestly the same as strapping the horse to a light object. It's just the illusion of safety. Oh, man. So he's taken to this cave, and he can tell that it's underground because they're walking downwards, and he can start to hear echoes. It gets colder. It's moist. So clearly they're in a cavern of some sort. And they get down into this cavern, and there's all these little caves that connect to it. So those are sort of like dorms. And the cavern that he's in is sort of their main area where they all congregate. And then this orc comes out, this orc named Ishkar. And Ishkar is the advisor to Hellscream. So he's the first one, essentially, that Thrall has to get past in order to talk to Hellscream. And so Ishkar says that he knows who Thrall is already, and they've heard of Blackmore's pet. That's what they call him. And believe it or not many things piss off Thrall, but he does not like being called a pet. That's the one thing that really boils
Slave
his blood.
Is fine. Pet,
yeah.
Okay.
Call me slave. Hi, I'm Thrall. I'm not a pet, but you can call me slave. So he struggles to convince them because this is the scene where he goes to show them his scars. And there's nothing there. So he sort of has to convince them by sheer will. And they say, okay, well, if you are truly worthy, then you'd be able to defeat our greatest warriors. So they bring 3 warriors out to fight him. And they give him no weapons and no armor to fight them.
See, all I can picture when you're telling me about humans fighting is the goofiness of WoW humans. The way they all have their legs perfectly aligned with their body, and their knees stick out, and they
they run in a really strange way.
Yeah, they're crash test dummies, and
I was even thinking the last time I played World of Warcraft that the NPCs really remind me of unionized workers because they will not attack something outside their aggro radius at all, and they will not attack NPCs that they are not explicitly intended to fight. So if you're fighting a Marine, they'll help you. But if you start fighting one of the gruntlings, they won't help you because they're not intended to fight grunts.
Right.
So they'll just wait around. They're like, no, man, when a Marine shows up, I'm going to fight him.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking...
It's not my detail.
You wrote these NPCs obviously to be background, but it would be nice if they would cooperate. And yeah, there is a cool disconnect that happens where... the humans are badass in the lore, but in the game they're weird because they're in the uncanny valley, right? Where they're sort of like humans, but they're not.
Whereas everything else can kind of
and who knows what a Tauren would move like? A cow person? You can kind of make it up. And an orc, even though they're human in shape, because their muscles are so much thicker, it looks better.
Yeah.
Their walking animation. So he has to fight these 3 soldiers who he actually dismantles. They all try to fight him, but he's so much bigger, so much stronger, and way better trained because he's been training his entire life and fighting in gladiator matches. So he defeats all 3 of them, but he refuses to kill any of them, even though that's the orc way. Because he says, your numbers are already too few. I'm not going to deplete your fighting force any more than is necessary. And then his next task is brought before him, and it is a young human boy who is bound and beaten. And they say that this boy will be a future orc killer. So you have to kill him now in order to prevent him from doing that.
Whoa.
So Thrall says, if this child takes up arms against me in the future, then I shall kill him on the battlefield, and I shall take a certain pleasure in doing, because I will know that I am fighting for the rights of my people. But I will not kill a bound child who lies helpless before me, human though he is. So, in the face of all pressure, he still sticks to his morals, even though he has no one to support him. And he even goes on to say that if that means he has to die by fighting against their greater numbers, he will.
Wow.
So he's willing to die to protect one human child, which I think is very appropriate because it takes a special type of person to lead. It takes a type of person who essentially doesn't want to lead to do it.
Well, it demonstrates that it's one thing if you're going to say no man left behind. It's an entirely different thing if you said I'm going to stay against an overwhelming amount of enemies to get that one man and make sure he is not left behind. Like
easier said than done, right?
Your morals need to stand up to the adversity of the spirit of what you say. You know, it's one thing that Harry Potter says he's going to defeat Voldemort. It's an entirely different thing that every fucking time Voldemort shows up, Harry's ready to fucking throw down. Even as a child.
It's true. That's putting money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Right? And right as he's saying this, the orcs are getting ready to attack him for refusing their challenge. And then they hear a scream, an ungodly scream. And it's Hellscream. That's where he gets his nickname from, because his battle cry is so terrifying. You only hear it 2 or 3 times in the story, but every time it is specifically mentioned how loud and unsettling it is.
It's not the Wilhelm scream?
Probably worse than the Wilhelm scream. Isn't that from Wilhelm scream? What's that from? Is that from Dark Souls?
No, the original Wilhelm scream is from like a 1950s or 30s movie.
Oh, it's a stock scream.
It's a stock scream that's been used in like 400 movies.
Oh, okay.
It's in every Star. I'm pretty sure it's in every Star Wars film, maybe.
I would imagine this more like the roar of a bear. That would be the closest analog, I would say. Maybe a lion meets a bear, because it would truly be terrifying to actually hear it.
Yeah.
You don't get a nickname like Hellscream otherwise. Doomhammer got his nickname because of his massive warhammer. So Hellscream obviously got his for a reason. So Hellscream enters the chamber, and it says he rips down the animal skin that was covering it. That's so wasteful. Because then they have to put that back up. Why couldn't he just move it to the side? Like, for drama, he ripped down the covering of... I just thought that was weird.
That shit's always hilarious.
The shit that I pick up on.
Just like, I just love it when someone's just like, man, that was like really irresponsible of this guy. It's like this scene on Friends where he's gonna clear the table like with his arm and like throw Phoebe on it, and he's just like, well, actually I should move this. No,
this is expensive.
This is expensive. Yeah.
The best is when later in that episode he sweeps everything and she said, that was a lot better, and he's like, this isn't my stuff. Someone else's table. So he comes in, and if you have never seen what Hellscream looks like, he's dressed in all red and black. He's got tons of piercings, and he has chains hanging from all of his armor that sway when he walks. He really is a badass. I love Hellscream. So he walks in, and Thrall notices that he has the red eyes.
Oh.
Which is probably part of why he dresses in red and black. But he comes in, and Grom likes the mercy that Thrall showed, and he scorns his own men. He says, why would you put us all at risk like that to bring a child here when they've done nothing to us?
Mm-hmm.
So he tells his own man to take it back and kind of gives him this, I will kill you if you harm that child look. So he sends these men away to bring the child back to the farmers. And he's talking to Thrall, and he calls him Thrall of Durnhold. And Thrall goes, please, just call me Thrall.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't call me of the place I was
And
a
he
slave
said, well,
to.
are you sure that you don't want to change your name Thrall? And he said, no, I want to keep it as a reminder of what was done to me and what was done to the other orcs.
Well, it's a huge slap in the face to be like, oh,
You were defeated by a slave.
yeah, exactly. That
slave.
name is right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
I thought it was pretty appropriate. So Hellscream and Thrall keep talking because Thrall just desperately wants to know what his past is. And he has that cloth, the swaddling cloth I told you about, the blue and...
Swaddling cloth?
Yeah, that's what you put a kid in, a little baby in a swaddling
okay.
cloth. So he shows it to him, and Hellscream recognizes the symbol because he is a chieftain himself. And so the Hellscream is the chieftain of the Warsong clan, which is something that you hear a lot in World of Warcraft.
Warsaw, yeah.
Warsong, yeah. So Hellscream recognizes the symbol, tells him that it's of the Frost Wolves, and directs him that he can find them in the mountains. Excuse me, but Thrall is not ready to make that journey yet. And this is the point at which Thrall finally asks, you remember that scene where the orc attacked him back in the castle?
Yeah.
He asks him what the orc was saying because he memorized what the orc said to him.
Oh.
And Grom tells him that the orc was saying, run, I will protect you. He thought that the guards in the training exercise were trying to kill Thrall, and he was trying to save him.
Wow.
But he was cut down in the process.
Tragic.
Super tragic. When I read that, I put the book down briefly. I wish there was a name to that nameless orc, just so that we could honor him.
Was that... I forget who it was. No, sorry, it was a friend. He was saying that, like... He was telling me to continue playing The Last of Us. Because I was like, yeah, it was okay. You know, I played a couple hours of it, and I was like, whatever. And he's like, dude, there's like 6 parts in that story where I put the game down. Had to come back.
Yeah, man. It's sometimes really impactful.
Yeah.
So this is also where Thrall first learns about magic, because he knew a bit from Kelgar, who he met in the camp, but he doesn't know much. And so Grom explains it to him this way. There is shamans and warlocks, and both can do the same things, but at different costs. If a shaman were to start a fire, they would call upon the spirit of fire, and the fire would call down lightning to create fire. Natural process. Whereas the warlock would call upon the demons to fill them with hellfire and allow them to channel that hellfire to burn their enemies. Both achieve the same thing, but they're done very differently. When you summon the spirit of fire, you ask the spirit of fire to do that. You don't tell it. But when you summon the demonic energy, it is both a request and a demand, but you have to give up a little bit of yourself to do it.
Right.
And that's where the trade comes in. And that's why all the orcs are empty, because they hollowed themselves out piece by piece by piece to use their demonic magic. So this is when Thrall...
It's like the difference between English-speaking Canadians and French-speaking Canadians. They
they have to give a piece of their soul every time.
No, actually. English speakers say requests, whereas in French it's demande.
Demande. That's so true. Oh man, that's funny. You know, it's a demand request. It's a voluntold type thing. So Thrall describes the camps to Grom because he's actually been inside of them, so he has a better understanding. And this is where they start to create a plan of how they're going to liberate the camps, because all along that has been the goal. And they also talk about how Gul'dan is no more and how his warlocks are scattered to the winds. So at least at this point, there's no more Shadow Force fighting against the orcs.
Yeah.
So all the orcs need to do is bring themselves together again, and things will be right. So their plan is that they're just going to essentially go camp to camp, building their force up.
Nice.
And during this time, Blackmore gets worse and worse and worse because Thrall is gone, so he has no more money earnings from the gladiator pits. And his plan to take over the alliance with the orcs is basically shattered.
No.
So he keeps getting more and more drunk and more depressed until the young boy who was released by the Warsong clan, his story gets to his town, and then his town tells the local garrison, and the local garrison sends word to Blackmore that Thrall is in this one area. Suddenly, he's no longer depressed because now he has a lead to go off of. And this is also a point where he's talking to a messenger, and the messenger is so worried that he's going to be killed for bringing the message that he's like, I don't want to tell you, my lord. And he's like, if you don't tell me, I'm going to kill you. So just spit it out. So now they're going to look for him. And this is actually a sad part. Taretha's always a sad character because she's kind of just this pawn that just gets beat around and there's no good in her life. So she's walking around in the forest and there's a tree that her and Thrall decided on. And if she sees him leave a necklace there, a necklace that she gave him, it means they need to meet. So she goes there every day to check to see if there's a message from Thrall. And every day the tree is empty. And then she thinks to herself, Thrall at least is 3, but my days as a slave loom numberless ahead of me. So Taretha is kind of a mirror character to Thrall because she is what Thrall would be if he never escaped. A complete slave to Blackmore.
Yeah.
And it's also something that sort of pains Thrall all along because he knows that this is happening. Even though he doesn't have any contact with her, he's very aware that things have not gotten better since he left. And Blackmore starts to close in now because he knows where the boy was taken from and he knows the rough direction that Thrall headed. So they start to close in on the Warsong clan. And this is the point at which they sort of decide that they either need to they need to shit or get off the pot. So they either need to go and liberate the camps immediately or they need to go back into hiding. And Grom wants to liberate the camps now, whereas Thrall realizes that they don't have the time and that they're essentially cornered. So what he does is he leaves the Warsong clan and he creates this really complicated path for Blackmore to follow him so that he leads away from them to try and save them.
Nice.
The goal being that he will try to find his own clan over the winter, and when the spring comes, they will finally take on the encampments. And you were right, it is the Alterac Mountains. I have it written here.
Nice.
So he ventures into the Alterac Mountains with a tiny amount of food and a couple of traps to catch things, and that's all he has. So he exhausts the food pretty much immediately, because if you're making a multi-day journey and you're a massive creature, you're going to need a lot of food. And as he goes up the mountains, he finds less and less game because the mountains become more unforgivable.
Right.
So he essentially has no food, and he's drinking water, which would be from mountain streams. So imagine how cold that water would be. So he's barely surviving, and in order to survive snowstorms, he's digging holes into the mountain and then hoping that he can dig his way back out at the end.
Holy.
Yeah, so he's really on the fringe, and he's actually at the point where he starts to hallucinate during the snowstorms.
Whoa.
He starts to see Taretha, he starts to see Blackmore, Sargent, all these people start popping into his head. And then he finally drops from exhaustion, and he's surrounded by these wolves. And then he sees these 3 hooded figures coming up to him, and right as the figures get to him, he starts to pass out. And he thinks he's hallucinating still. So he's actually mad that he doesn't get to figure out who these hooded figures are before he dies. He's like, why can't I see who they are? And then he wakes up in a cave, realizing that it was no hallucination. And so he wakes up in this cave, and there's this child there, and then an old orc, an old, shabby, beat-down orc. And the old orc introduces himself as Drekthar, and he's a shaman. And so Thrall tries to get up to like look across at Drekthar, and he gets slammed down onto the bed he's lying on. And he tries it a couple of times, and he keeps getting slammed down onto the bed.
What, by a person?
By Drekthar.
Oh.
He looks over and he notices that Drekthar's hand is outstretched, and it moves slightly every time he gets slammed down into the bed. So Drekthar is a shaman.
Oh, he's actually holding him down
with air. He's holding him down with the air. So he realizes that Drekthar is actually blind. He has these white eyes that have no character to them. So he's a blind shaman, but he can essentially see everything because of his powers.
Right.
And that's why he has actually the young boy. The young boy is to help him see for all the things that his powers can't help him do.
Right.
And
like, what is this? Am I on the right webpage here?
Yeah, exactly. Are these the poisonous berries or the non-poisonous ones? So he is eventually amenable to Thrall because Thrall convinces him that his story is true and why he's there.
Amenable?
Amenable meaning, like in French, ami, friends.
Amenable.
Yeah, it means to be kind and generous towards.
I can make
too. So the cloth that Thrall had all along, that swaddling cloth, he gives it to Drekthar, and Drekthar is able to find essentially blood mist in the cloth.
Okay.
That speaks to him because it's the blood of his parents. And he's actually able to tell that his parents were killed and where they were killed from the cloth.
Mm-hmm.
So he tells him who his parents are, who are the lost chieftains of the clan that he's just arrived at.
Oh, nice cloth. I see there's blood in it. It's talking to me. It's telling me where we should go.
Must have thought he was so nuts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I should follow this guy.
And then the fire starts to speak to Drekthar about Thrall, telling Drekthar that Thrall is a worthwhile stranger to let into their camp.
For the night is dark and full of terrors?
Yeah. Well, it's weird because he even makes a mention that he says, the fire is usually extremely unpredictable and often doesn't speak at all. So the fact that it spoke for Thrall is a big deal.
So they're often entertained by Scatman in the fire?
Scoop
it's
up,
like,
up.
I'm sorry, it's saying something. It's like skip up.
Well, that would be confusing for the era. In order to bring him in, they don't want Thrall to be chieftain immediately because you can't have someone lead your people who doesn't understand your people. So they start him at the bottom. He gets all of the crappiest things. He eats after the wolves eat.
Holy.
So he dead last. He gets the worst bed. And he basically has to do everything. So basically they get everything through their shaman, which is kind of unique because most clans don't have shamans.
Right.
But the shaman made the pact with the wolves, and that's why the wolves are with them. But the shaman also made a pact with the goats. So occasionally, when there is not enough food, one of the goats will sacrifice itself.
Whoa.
In order to keep the other goats alive, because the clan protects the goats from wild animals.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of these deals that they make with nature. And Drekthar tells Thrall about his powers, but he's trying to introduce him to how to use the powers. And he talks about how you have to ask, you have to give respect, and you have to thank the elements. So it really is a partnership. The elements do things for you because they want to do things for you. But then after a while, Thrall gets a little too pissed off because he's doing all these things, these grunt works, and finally someone like heavily insults him, so he attacks the person. And he thinks he's going to be kicked out of the clan for it, but that was actually the test. The test was to see if he would be a subservient slave for long enough to prove he's humble, but not so long to prove that he's not worthy of being their leader.
Right.
So he had to revolt at some point, and I suppose that he chose the right moment, because that was when they let him in to be a member of their clan.
Nice.
Which is interesting, because it's true, you need both. You need to be humble, but you can't be subservient.
Right.
You need to push, but also allow to be pushed against. You need to have both of those aspects to be a good leader.
Right, yeah. We also need to understand when each is necessary.
That's a good point, when they're actually worth it. And now that he's ready to be in the clan, he's also ready to be a shaman, apparently.
What?
And that's why Drekthar has been training him all along, teaching him how to make requests and about respect for nature, because the fire must have told him that Thrall was destined to be a shaman. So Thrall is a shaman.
Thrall is a shaman.
He's a shaman and a warrior.
Huh.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny that they get their powers and they use their powers in these really innocuous ways sometimes, but then in other times they use them in these incredible, like, nature bending ways. For example, in the springtime, they request that the spirit of water direct melting away from their camp so that they don't get flooded.
Wow.
Yeah, so they basically can only survive there because of the shamans.
Yeah.
And Thrall is actually selected at this point by his wolf. His wolf's name is Snowsong, and she picks him specifically. And that's one of those things where when the wolf picks you, the bond is made for life. So Snowsong is now his wolf forever.
Wow.
Till one of them dies.
When do they give him his beige hood? It's classic beige hood.
I think that comes like after the Lich King. Pretty sure that's a Cataclysm thing, because he goes into hiding between the Lich King and Cataclysm.
Really?
Yeah, and then he comes back. So it's not really classic at all.
Who's the other big guy? What's his name? He's like the captain of Orgrimmar for a while.
Grom Hellscream.
Is it really?
But I'm pretty sure Grom has a son named Garrosh.
Garrosh.
Garrosh
That's who
Hellscream.
I'm looking for.
Yeah. I like Garrosh Hellscream. He's one
Yeah.
of my favorites, especially because, I mean, like father, like son.
Yeah.
So Thrall actually hears the reply of the spirits for the first time when they're redirecting the Meltwater, because Drekthar asks them, and then he hears the spirits replying to Drekthar saying, yes, we will grant your request. So Thrall really does have the power. And this is when he's told a little more about how his father left and went to Doomhammer, and then how he was killed by assassins there. But then after that, Doomhammer actually went into hiding. His forces were scattered, and Doomhammer hasn't been seen since. So he has disappeared. And as part of his training, Thrall has to spend a full day in silence. Yeah. And he also has to be alone and do it without any food. So he needs to essentially just, you know how in 300 they have to go and fight a wolf in the wilderness, essentially? Yeah. They have to do that, but they basically just have to spend the day in isolation. So he goes and he does this, and when he comes back, he's expecting that there's going to be some sort of ceremony at the camp, but everyone at the camp sort of segregates themselves, and Thrall goes to this special area that he'd never seen before, even though he'd been living there for months. And Drekthar says this area is only available to shamans. No one else is able to find or enter this area.
Wow.
And that's where Thrall is visited by the 5 spirits. So there's 5 spirits, not 4. So Earth visits him and brings flowers straight out of bald rock, and then starts earthquakes. Air visits him and lifts him up hundreds of feet in the air to the point where Drekthar he can barely see, and then lowers him back to the ground.
Wow.
Fire comes, scorches all of those flowers that were there before, and then fades into a nice tiny little fire before it goes out. Then water comes and brings snow, which turns into rain and then stops altogether.
Okay.
And then finally, the wilds is the final spirit, and that's the spirit of all the animals, all the humans, all the monsters, all the animals. And when the spirit of the wilds come to him, it's like being beaten, because he can feel the pain and happiness and everything else of all the spirits all at once.
Ooh.
So it's the most overwhelming of the spirits, and it's the last that he has to do before he's initiated as a shaman. And Drekthar even tells him that this is, not only is Thrall the most powerful shaman he's seen thus far, because he turned the snow to rain and then stopped it. So in his initiation, he's already able to control the elements.
Wow.
And he says that Thrall is the first shaman to have been initiated since the time of the warlocks, because the elements were so angry at the orcs for what they did that they had not accepted another shaman until now.
Thrall's the one in one of the, I think it was Cataclysm, when he he's basically like holding a tornado back with like a dragon in the center of it or something like that, and he's essentially just like always there, because like anyone who chooses to go through the story, like he's just basically
supporting the maelstrom.
He's always holding the maelstrom open.
Yeah, that's true. That would be a shaman's job sometimes. Yeah. So now that he has become a shaman, he's talking more and more to Drekthar about being a shaman, and Drekthar tells him that twice in Drekthar's life he's been refused by the elements. Only twice. Which also partly means he's only twice asked for unreasonable things.
Once when I was really high and I was hella thirsty and water refused to come to me.
Well, water was actually the one that refused him, believe it or not.
And also Earth had a problem with me because I was burning grass.
Yeah, Earth didn't like the burning, but fire liked it.
And wildlife had an issue too, because I had the munchies and I was really in a good mood for rabbit.
Yeah, I had some rabbit and some venison. So he asked water once to destroy a human village in his anger. And water refused because it would not be for the greater good.
Wow.
The other time was he asked the spirits of the wild to return his lost loved ones to him, his wife and child, and bitterly demanded it when they refused. So for years after that, he was refused by the elements altogether until he learned humility again.
Holy.
Yeah. So their power is really based on the elements.
Well, you can see how the shaman calling would definitely attract a different group than the warlock one, because the warlock one's like, it's just like on demand, but as at a cost, whereas shamans shamans have almost more power because they aren't destroying themselves, but need to obey a certain system.
Mm-hmm.
Like you couldn't do, I guess you can't do evil as a shaman.
Not really.
Yeah.
No. Which is kind of funny, because in World of Warcraft you can do whatever you want.
Well,
lightning, kill that good guy. Okay.
I mean, no one actually dies, right? They all come back.
Yeah, it's true. You get resurrected.
That was a terrifying hellscape. All of Azeroth just can't die.
Everyone comes back to life when they die. That would be kind of weird.
Like, who is the one that Zeus chains up and has him...
Prometheus?
Maybe. Oh, yes, because he's the one who brought fire to humans. Yes, okay. He just gets ripped apart by a bird every day.
And then brought back to life.
And this is like farmers in like Hillsbrad. They're just like, why are we here? Just to suffer.
I've died 39 times and I can't go anywhere. So Thrall actually starts to hunt as a shaman, which is kind of really OP in the end.
Lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt.
He doesn't use his power to find them, to kill them, but what he does is he uses the spirit of earth to find the herds, and then he uses the spirit of wind to direct his scent away from the herds so that they can't smell them.
Oh, that's cool.
So it really does make it way easier for them to do that. And then he's also sometimes, if they're in desperate need, will ask for sacrifices. So he asked the spirit of the deer for a sacrifice, and a ghostly spirit of a deer appeared before him and led them through the forest to a deer that had broken its leg and was dying. So they got their sacrifice basically without having to harm anything. And they also use, this is what I thought was really cool, they mentioned it for the tiniest segment. They like glanced over it, but it says Thrall was returning from gathering the sacred herbs that they used to contact the elements.
Oh boy.
And I'm thinking, woohoo, sacred herbs. But that's all they said about them.
Reagents, man.
So yeah, there's some reagents involved. But either way, when he gets back from that walk, there's a stranger in the camp. And For some reason, the stranger is being treated better than Thrall was treated when he showed up, which confuses Thrall because they have limited resources. But he's told that the difference is that this is the end of winter rather than the start of winter, so they have more resources to share.
Oh.
Which kind of makes sense, right? In the spring, you can support strangers. In the fall, winter, you need to conserve your resources.
Okay.
So I understand that, but the stranger claims that he has no clan whatsoever and talks about having been in exile for 20 years.
Oh.
Which is as old as Thrall is. 20 years.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Thrall is actually angered because the stranger continually insults the Frostwolves in sort of almost like an attempt to piss Thrall off. Mm-hmm. So he says that he wants to fight the stranger, and the stranger accepts the battle. And the stranger is almost the size of Thrall, which means that he's a massive orc by other orc standards. And he gets up and he's wearing he's wearing black armor, head to toe, and he's got a massive warhammer.
Oh.
And he attacks Thrall, who's got this tiny little stick. And the stick breaks, but based off Thrall's experience, he's still able to defeat the stranger. And it takes 8 members of his clan to pull him off the stranger. Yeah. So he's quite the man, quite the monster. And the stranger says that he hasn't been bested since he fought Duratan, who's Thrall's father. And he even talks about being friends with Duratan. And then he tells him that he's traveled a long way so that he could meet Thrall, and introduces himself as Orgrim Doomhammer. So he's been in exile ever since Duratan was killed.
Wow.
And he's been waiting for Thrall's son ever since he heard about Thrall of Durotar. Of Durenhold. So he came all the way there just to meet with Thrall. Doomhammer.
Oh, okay.
So that's why he's with the Frostwolves.
Why is he insulting the Frostwolves?
He wanted to fight Thrall.
Oh.
He's trying to piss him off.
He was yeah, okay. He
Exactly.
just wanted to just try him out,
Just poking the bear, yeah. So this is the point at which Doomhammer actually compares Blackmoor to Gul'dan. And when I was reading it, I was like, oh, there you go. I said that. And he talks about how everything went down. He talks about Blackmoor. He talks about how Taretha and Sargent were good to him. He talks about how he escaped and the camps and how it all went. And Doomhammer is actually kind of surprised because he's never heard of a noble human. So when he hears of Taretha and Sargent, who helped Thrall and who even helped him escape, he's skeptical, but it's the first time he's heard this, so it's new evidence to him that maybe not all humans are bad. The same way all humans assume all orcs are bad, right? And now they know that liberation of the camp is the only thing that they can do, right? Because the spring has come, so it's finally time to liberate the camps. But they can't liberate the camps if the camps don't want to be liberated. Right? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can open the doors, but you can't make the orcs flee. So what they do, which I thought was pretty cool, is they sent Thrall into the camps the same way they did before. They had him get captured, pretend to be a stupid orc, get thrown in the camp, and then he would slowly build unrest, talking to all of them, telling them what the plan is going to be and that how they would escape. And then what they did to signal that it was time for an attack. So when a dark moon came around, Thrall called down 3 lightning bolts and did that twice to make a really obvious signal to the orcs that it was time to take the camp. And then this is where you hear the scream from Hellscream. So imagine you hear lightning, 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 which is weird in and of itself. And then you hear a bear lion screaming in the forest, along with maybe 100 other voices all screaming. And just coming out of the darkness at you. How terrified you would be.
Yeah.
And then a moment later, he uses a lightning bolt to blow a hole through the wall to let all of the people out. So now they're on shattered battlements, trying to fight off orcs from inside their walls and outside their walls in the pitch dark because they chose a dark moon to attack. And orcs have much better eyesight in the dark than humans do, so the orcs just slaughtered the humans.
Wow.
And and took their people. So at this point, everyone kind of knows about Blackmore's drinking. Like, word has even got back to Thrall about how bad Blackmore's drinking has become because he's losing this battle.
Yeah.
And this is the scene where Blackmore is like talking about killing the messenger, because the messenger brings the message that not only are the camps being raided, they're being raided by Thrall himself, which really pisses him off. And then this is a really good example of how Blackmore does not have any redeeming qualities. He talks very briefly about right and wrong, and then he says, for the briefest moment, Blackmore's thoughts drifted back towards the final beating he'd given Thrall. Perhaps it had been a bit much. But he would not let himself feel guilty over his mistreatment of a disobedient slave. Thrall had thrown it all away with these grunting, stinking, worthless thugs. Let him rot where he fall.
Wow.
So you can feel the pinball there from, hey, maybe it wasn't so good, all the way back to, no, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
And Thrall really summarizes it well later on when he says, Blackmore was a man torn between embracing a legacy of treachery and overcoming it, of being a brilliant strategist and fighter, and being a coward, vicious bully. And that's exactly what he's like. There are moments where he can be redeemed, but as soon as he's redeemed, he goes right back into a pit of bullshit. He's just a terrible, terrible man.
Yeah.
So he issues orders that all of the camps be fortified, and he sends Langston out to one of the camps to help secure them. Because at this point, they've taken multiple camps. That first one set them in a course of taking, I think, 3 more. So of the 7 or 8 camps, 4 of them have been taken. So at this point, the orcs are winning the war, and their army is growing, which means that each camp is easier and easier to take because they have greater numbers. So at this point, the prisoners have started to hear the news that other camps are being liberated. So Thrall no longer has to go into the camps anymore to convince them to leave. They're already prepped to leave because they've heard these rumors. So this is now where the morality of the orc army starts to become an issue because they have to feed themselves. And much like happened during the Civil War, where the soldiers started stealing from all of the local people in order to feed their supply lines, the orcs ravage this nearby town and steal everything and kill all of the women and children.
Whoa.
So Thrall shuts it down like you wouldn't believe. He walks in and grabs the leader of the group that did it, slams him onto the ground, and tells him that there will be no more of that whatsoever, that any food you need will come from hunting game out of the forest, and any disobedience will be answered to Thrall. Just shuts it straight down. No cruelty to women and children whatsoever. And
it would have been better if he brought a lightning bolt down on his head and made it explode, and looked at everyone else and said, I don't know, something like,
"Are you ready for this?"
Like you stand tall, but something, I don't know, a fucking pun about electricity hitting the highest point, you know? It's like,
stand pretty tall.
Will you stand tall through my thunderstorm or something like
with
that?
With that lightning rod on your head?
Yeah.
So after they've done the first 4 encampments, they come to the 5th, and that's the first one where Thrall doesn't go inside. But unfortunately, it's actually a bright night, and it's also at an encampment where they've lit fires because they're prepared. They're ready for the orcs, but they can't delay anymore. They still need to attack. So the horde approaches, and then all of a sudden the doors open and mounted guards just come flooding out of the gates because they were literally standing ready for the orcs to show up. So the horde is actually revitalized by the challenge because none of the camps have prevented them at all.
Yeah.
So this is the first real challenge they're facing, and you hear all these new battle cries because they're now like, all right, it's a fight. And so Thrall notices that he can't use any of his big weaponry. He can't use earthquakes, he can't use lightning because the people are too packed together. So what he does is he entreats the horses to throw the men off by calling upon the spirit of the wild.
Wow.
But what's really cool is that the spirit says to Thrall, these children of mine are trained in battle. They are not afraid to die because they're war horses. So Thrall has to entreat them again, saying, even though they're ready to die, there's no need for them to die in vain. And it's only upon that second request that they actually give up. So the spirits even recognize that an animal bred for war doesn't necessarily need to be protected from war.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the soldiers that fall to the ground, he calls upon the earth to entangle them with roots and like bind them in place. And he's happy to see that his soldiers don't actually kill the bound soldiers. They move on to fight other standing men. So the honor that used to be a part of the Horde is returning. They're starting to become these warriors who just seek Valhalla, essentially.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the orcs are like. And so they're storming the fortress, they're moving in, and Langston is actually at this particular fort. And he is the most useless, whimpering little baby of a man. And he's swinging his sword, and he can't see anything. He's just swinging his sword, hoping to survive. And then eventually Thrall spots him and just basically just bats the sword out of his hand and scoops him up. Drags him out to in front of the fort, and he throws him down in front of a willow tree, or an oak tree, sorry, and says, hold on to him. And it just grabs him with its roots and holds him there while the battle takes place.
I'll do that for you.
Thrall is cool because he goes from being a shaman back to being a warrior all the time.
Oh, okay.
So he's a shaman, but then when it's necessary, he'll pull out his axe and just start hacking people to bits. Yeah, and that's part of why Thrall is so awesome, is that he's dangerous on all accounts. He's an all-around leader. So he goes in, he rescues all the people, group by group, he gets them to leave. And then he has to signal the retreat because he doesn't hear the call for the retreat from anyone else. And when they get back to the camp, they realize that that's because Doomhammer has been injured. Doomhammer was the actual leader and was supposed to call the retreat, but he was stabbed through and through with a spear. Basically the same injury that Thrall sustained from the ogre, interestingly enough. But he doesn't have any healers, so there's nothing to bring him back. So before Thrall actually comes back to the camp, he levels the entire fortress using an earthquake.
Whoa.
So as a sign that no one will ever be imprisoned there again, he levels it to the ground with all of the soldiers in it. Yeah. So they get back, so they see Doomhammer, and Doomhammer's still alive at this point. He's been impaled and is dying, but he's still alive. And he tells Thrall two things. He says, you must take my armor and weapons. You are now the war chief. You have to continue. And then he tells him that he wants them to take the coward's weapon out of his back before he dies. He doesn't want to die with the spear in him. So they remove the spear, and then as he's dying, someone tells Thrall the real story of how Doomhammer died. Evidently, he was fighting 8 men on horseback at the same time when he got stabbed. And that just goes to show how the orcs are. They would probably rather die in blood and glory than comfortably in their beds. And that's what they're all about. So Thrall takes his armor and wears it. He even refuses to have the breastplate repaired. He wants to wear it as a sign. Same as his name. Everything with Thrall is about symbolism.
Yeah.
Especially because Thrall himself is a symbol to his people, right? He is a symbol of freedom.
Yeah.
And at this point, bitter, he goes back to interrogate Langston because Langston's still bound by that tree.
Yeah.
So he goes back and he talks to Langston. He finds out all about Blackmore's drinking problems, and he also realizes that the whole plan was to take over the Alliance. That's the first time he's told that his job was supposed to be to lead the orcs against the other Alliance. So he starts to really figure out the plot at this point, and he actually interrogates Langston with the roots of the tree. If Langston doesn't tell him what he wants, the roots get tighter and tighter.
Oh.
Yeah. And he even has one scratch at his neck, and he says, "How long do you think it would take for that root to go down your throat?" So yeah, it's a really terrifying investigation. But eventually he sets Langston free, and he has an owl follow them, track them back to Durnhold to ensure that they don't plan any other ambushes. And that's one of the things that's really overpowered about shamans, is they can control animals to do anything they want, right? Mm-hmm. So he essentially has a drone. Just right? Yeah. Just an owl is going to follow them, and he said to the owl, "Return to me if they do anything other than go back to Durnhold," so that he would know about their plans. Yeah, it's really quite ingenious. So Doomhammer is burned along with the other soldiers that fell. Also, the wolf to Drekthar dies in that battle, so it really is a tragic final fight for the encampments. And that's the final encampment that they actually free. Because finally they decide that it's time that they need to attack Durnhold directly. Cut off the head, and the body falls. So at this point, their force is about 2,000 men. Well, 2,000 warriors.
Right.
Definitely not all men. I mean, you remember Draka.
Yeah. Yeah.
The real warriors, right? So they make camp several miles south of Durnhold, and then Thrall goes with a small party to try and make contact with Taretha, because an inside man is definitely the best way to go. So he meets with Taretha, and she has to go out of this totally separate exit to meet him, because she notices his pendant in the tree during the daytime, but she has to leave during the nighttime. And the only reason she was able to leave to meet him when he escaped is because of the fire, all that chaos. So the only way she can get out of the castle unnoticed is this tunnel that connects Blackmore's room to a local town. It's an escape tunnel meant for the Lord of Durnhold. So she actually has to sneak into his room while he's sleeping, using no light, and navigate her way through a dark tunnel with no light whatsoever, not even moonlight, because it's an underground tunnel.
Yeah.
And then find her way up on the other side with all the supplies that she brought him. And it's a terrifying scene, because it's stairs, and then the ground is sloped down, and then back up, and then more stairs. And she has to do all of it in the pitch black, which is awful. So she goes to meet him, and this is, I think Thrall grew more since she met him, but this is a moment where she grabs his hand, and her hand goes around 2 of his fingers. That's how big he is. So imagine your whole hand with just 2 fingers held inside of it. Shrek, I think, is actually a fairly good analog.
Yeah.
The size of Shrek is somewhat appropriate. He would just be taller and less stout.
Yeah.
So when he goes to meet with Taretha, she sees the scouts in the background, and they do not trust her at all, because they've never met a human that they like, right?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that Taretha proves how strong she is, because there's these orcs, which are essential monsters, and they're all glowering at her, having no trust for her whatsoever. And she even says, "If you're friends of Thrall's, you're friends of mine." And she shakes their hands.
Oh.
Yeah, and she sort of proves to these orcs that there are good humans, which I really like, because Taretha is probably the strongest character after Thrall, because she has no power, but she's still willing to do what she has to do.
Yeah.
And she brings them lots of stuff. She brings them bandages and food and just other sundries that the army might need. Obviously, she can't bring very much for a force of 2,000 people, but whatever. If you need bandages, it doesn't matter where you get them from or how many you get. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And she then decides to return, even though Thrall... Thrall again tries to get her to stay with him, tries to get her to not go back to the castle, but she has to for her family, because Blackmore will kill her family if she leaves. So she goes back to the castle, and when she gets there, Blackmore is waiting for her with a bunch of his guards, and he's stone cold sober. So he knew that she was escaping. And he was just waiting for her to get back. So she's totally cover blown.
Yeah.
And at this point, Thrall is ready to take on the castle. So in the morning, they send a small envoy ahead of the army, Thrall being a part of it, and they approach the gates to negotiate. So at this point, Blackmore has sent for forces to come, alliance forces to come and back them up. So in 4 hours, the alliance will arrive. That's all they have to do is hold out for 4 hours, and their reinforcements will get there and they'll win. However, Blackmore doesn't want to stall because Blackmore is wasted.
Oh.
Totally wasted. So he's standing at the top of the battlements and he is just shouting all of these ridiculous things that don't make any sense. He's actually prodding Thrall and making him upset, trying to make it worse. And then at one point, he's told, you either have to negotiate or die. And he says, well, how about this for a negotiation? And he throws Taretha's severed head over the battlements, and it lands right in front of Thrall. And he's staring into her lifeless eyes. And that's the end of negotiations. So Blackmore still won't signal an attack because he's super drunk. So it's Langston standing behind him, and Langston is wishing that he had the balls to just throw Blackmore over the wall.
Yeah.
Because if he did, it would end everything, but he just doesn't have the guts. So Sergeant just takes over and orders the attack, because if neither of the lords are going to do it, somebody has to do it.
Yeah.
And his name is Sergeant after all.
Yeah.
It is a military position. So Blackmore is now crawling on his hands and knees because total warfare has taken hold. And the castle is shaking because Thrall is sending waves of earthquakes at the front doors. And the whole time, he is screaming Blackmore's name over and over again. So Blackmore is running. There's dust and debris everywhere. He's crawling on his hands and knees and hearing this bear screaming, Blackmore! And trying to break down the castle walls. So Langston finally just fully gives Sergeant command because he knows that he can't do anything, and he just essentially goes to hide. The orcs breach the gate because their earthquakes finally shatter them open, and they flood into the castle. So the castle, I think, only has like 500 men, and there's 2,000 orcs at their gates. So they're screwed. There's nothing they can do. And Blackmore retreats to his room looking for the tunnel, right? Trying to escape to the stable. So he gets into the tunnel, he's running, and then suddenly the whole roof of the tunnel collapses in front of him and creates an impassable wall. And the tunnel that he's in starts to shake too. So he has to sprint to get out of his tunnel before it all collapses on him, because Thrall brought it down around his head.
Yeah.
And then he's forced back into the room where Thrall is standing. And Thrall gives him a sword because he wants to defeat him in honest combat. So Blackmore even says that he's proud of what he has made Thrall. So at this point, he's still totally delusional. And when they're fighting, Blackmore says something about needing a shield. So Thrall takes the door and throws it at Blackmore and says, use this as a shield. And basically, they just sort of dance around having a conversation because Thrall is so much more powerful. He knows he could kill him at any point. And after a while, he just decides that it's enough, and he just slashes him and kills him. Because Blackmore was only powerful because of the people around him.
Yep.
He was never really powerful himself. He then marches out to see the men outside, and he sees Langston, and he tells Langston to send a message to the Alliance that they could either leave the orcs in peace, or they could bring total war upon themselves. And then he goes to Sergeant, and he tells Sergeant that if all the men lay down their arms, everyone will live. And he keeps that promise. They lay down their arms, and he lets them all live, but he takes everyone from the castle and levels Durnhold to the ground, same way he did to the encampment. And that's all they wrote for Durnhold. The last thing he chooses to do is, once everyone has left the castle and he's leveled it, he gives the necklace that Taretha gave him, he gives it back to her parents as a token. And from there, he takes his position as chief of the Horde with one final speech to his people. He is now Thrall, war chief of the Horde,
Wow.
having come full circle. Son of Duratan, the rightful heir to the chieftainhood, has finally taken his place.
This would really be a fantastic film.
It would
the
be.
whole time I was imagining how it would go.
I would love to see the Warcraft movie now, just to see how well, because how was the CGI?
That was like the best part.
Okay.
I haven't seen the film, but I've been told it's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's why I haven't seen it yet. But if you did the CGI right, which it looks pretty damn good, this could be a fantastic story.
Yeah.
And
Or you could do it the practical method with orcs. I mean, for the most part, you'd have to use a lot of forced perspective in order to make Thrall seem bigger than everybody else, but it could be done.
or you could even just have Jason Momoa or someone like that play him who's fucking huge, and
Yeah.
it just naturally makes that difference up. But I think that the character Thrall is so cool because he's sort of the ultimate sacrificial lamb. He is willing to do whatever it takes and does time and time again.
But he's a bridge between humans and orcs.
He is. He really is. And so is Charitha.
Yes.
The two of them are, their own halves of the bridge. And I feel like that was the underlying theme. The underlying theme was that orcs are people, humans are people, they're just different people.
Mm.
And it also shows that, have you ever heard the expression strayed but never lost?
Right.
Yeah, it's that sort of idea. Just because they don't walk the path of the shaman anymore doesn't mean they can't get back to where they were. Really shows that redemption is available as long as you're willing to fight for it. And in this case, fight really hard for it.
Yeah.
What actually inspired me to get back into this is I was playing World of Warcraft at the time on a private server. And it was cool because it was playing the game got me excited to read the book, and reading the book got me excited to play the game. So they kind of supported each other. And I was also playing an orc shaman, which helped.
Right.
Because then it sort of brings that association. And it's a private server, so you can name your character Thrall and get that name.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was actually pretty fun. But he wasn't tall enough. Wasn't appropriate.
That's good stuff.
So I don't necessarily know what the next one is, the next discussion, but I would say probably gonna be Anchorman.
Nice.
I'm thinking.
Nice.
I think it would be fun. Finally bring a movie to the format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Everyone's favorite movie, too. If it's not your favorite movie, don't listen. I'm kidding. I don't care. But I used to think it was the funniest movie ever.
Yeah.
And it still might be. It's just I've seen it so many times it doesn't
Yeah.
have the punch value.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm curious to go through it.
Right on.
Right on, bro.
Well, tune in next time where you find out whether milk was a bad choice.
Yeah, for episode 126.
Right on.
Thank you for joining us.